Welcome back. U.S. tariffs on automobiles and auto parts will come into force on April the 3rd, 2 days from now, while tariffs on the relevant automobile parts will be implemented no later than May the 3rd. So on autos, April the 3rd, on auto parts, no later than May the 3rd. Our next guest says the effect of the duties is likely to be very significant. Let's speak to that expert now. He's John Boscariol, leader of international trade and investment law group at the law firm of McCarthy-Tetrault. John, thank you very much for joining us. So let's just set up what we know factually. How severe are the tariffs, and exactly when do they come into effect?
Good morning, Paul, and happy Tariff Liberation Day Eve. It's great to be with you and your viewers today.
Thank you.
The tariffs are scheduled to come into effect on automobiles in the next couple of days, and they are significant, 25%. And certain automobile parts that have been identified, those tariffs are also scheduled to come into effect in a couple of days, except there's an exemption for those that qualify as originating under our USMCA or CUSMA free trade agreement. The impact will be very significant, no doubt. I think those in the automobile industry, and not just the manufacturers, but the suppliers, the entire supply chain in Canada and the United States are currently figuring out how to deal with this. Probably the most challenging element of that, Paul, is the exemption, or at least the indication that we've received from the U.S. government that U.S. content that makes up part of the automobile will not be subject to the U.S. tariff. But the key is, how do we figure that out? And a lot of work needs to go into doing that.
And is that an echo from the first Trump administration? That sounds familiar, this notion of U.S. content in vehicles.
Yeah, it is an echo from that. And frankly, with all the tariff measures that the U.S. has been implementing, one of the things we've been looking at is specifically how do they apply to products that have U.S. content, not just on the automobile side, but also with respect to the aluminum and steel tariffs that were announced a couple of weeks ago, as well as other manufactured products. Because our supply chains, not just for automobiles, but for other products as well, are so integrated within North America, and in particular between Canada and the United States, there will be often significant U.S. content in a product that Canada is exporting to the United States. And the United States should not want to shoot itself in the foot by applying a tariff to the entire amount, which reduces the incentive of Canadian producers to include U.S. content in their products. So a policy that would make sense on the U.S. government side would be, let's see if there's a way we can relieve the tariff when it comes to products containing U.S. content.
And as you note in your writing on this, there's some hope, I guess, on the Canadian side that the U.S. administration may ease these tariffs as they apply to Canada. This arises out of a phone call between Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. And Ford came away from that call saying the tone of it was pretty positive. So how much do we know about that call, and what kind of inference is being drawn from it?
Well, I think Canada has a unique relationship with the United States when it comes to the automotive sector. And it's one that doesn't exist between the United States and other countries in the EU or in Asia. If you look back at the history of the automotive sector in Canada and the United States, it goes back 60 years. Essentially, you're going back to the Auto Pact in the 1960s. You have the Free Trade Agreement in the 1980s, NAFTA in the 1990s. All of that led to increased integration of our supply chain. That cannot be undone in a year, 2 years, probably not even really within 5 years. That takes, I think tariffs applied in that context could be catastrophic, not just for the Canadian automotive sector, but also for the U.S. And so I think Premier Ford's discussions with Lutnick likely reflected that reality, and hopefully that's going to be reflected in what we see being announced over the next couple of days, that this will not be as significant as it appears to be at least based on the announcements so far, in terms of specific tariffs on Canadian exports to the United States. And I'd expect the same with Mexico. They're also heavily integrated with the United States. They're heavily integrated into the North American automotive supply chain. So we're hoping that those conversations indeed reflect some kind of exemption or relaxation when it comes to the treatment of Canadian automotive whole vehicles, as well as parts moving from Canada to the United States. But as we've seen over the last weeks and months, very hard to predict until the final decision's actually announced.
A lot of people believe that what Donald Trump and his administration want to accomplish longer term is the permanent movement of some auto industry facilities from Canada and from Mexico into the United States permanently. You call the effect of these duties likely to be extremely significant. When you use that phrase, do you contemplate a scenario like that where an auto parts maker or even an assembly plant shuts down in Canada and moves to the U.S.?
Yeah, the reality is that just can't happen overnight, or even, as I said earlier, over a few years. That takes time. It takes time to build automotive facilities. You can't actually take a factory and just pick it up, move it from Ontario into Kentucky or one of the U.S. states. That's very difficult to do. And we're hoping that the policymakers in the Trump administration recognize that there's a reality here, that it just simply can't be done overnight if that's their objective. And frankly, in the bigger picture, we need to, and I think both the federal government and the Ontario government are pushing this very hard with their counterparts in the Trump administration. We need to convince them that the best result here is a fully integrated automotive market and supply chain between Canada and the United States, and obviously possibly including Mexico as well. That's best for employees, that's best for employment, that's best for consumers across North America. And that definitely has to be the message at this point to the Trump administration.
What kind of clients do you serve in the industry, without naming individual names of clients? Generally speaking, what does your client profile look like in your practice at McCarthy-Tetrault?
It's completely across the board, anywhere from retailers to financial service suppliers to manufacturers, including those that are part of the automotive supply chain, civil, aircraft, defense. It runs the whole gamut. But I can tell you, all of them are being impacted by this tariff uncertainty, and a number of them are looking forward, whatever the news is, tomorrow and in the next couple of days, to at least having some certainty in place as to what these measures are really going to be.
John, thank you for a good conversation. John Boscariol is leader of the International